Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at how to get your demo vocal from sounding like this.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
Sounding like this.
Meet me in the middle, but I've already gone cross the line.
Let's dive into it. So again, welcome back guys, Chris here. So in today's video we're going to be showing off the steps I take to get my more demo sounding vocals to sounding a bit more polished, a bit more professional. And in this process I'm going to show off two variations of how we can do this. One using the plugins I would normally reach for, which are some third-party plugins, and then another version using just stock plugins or free plugins, so that if you don't have the plugins that I'm using you can follow along if you're on Ableton. This carries over to like Logic and Pro Tools, but this is an Ableton video, so we're going to take it from that perspective. Also, as we kick this off, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, don't forget that bell, and let's crack on with the video. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to show you how I would go about doing this normally. As you can see at the bottom here, I've got my chain of plugins, not too much going on. And then I've also got the stock plugins section as a separate parallel, which we'll dive into a bit later. If you want to go ahead and see how I do this using only the stock or the free plugins, just use the chapter markers below and you can just skip ahead. So for some context on the song and how we go about doing this normally, first of all, I wrote this song with a girl called Federica. We write a lot of music together. Normally we record the vocals here on my microphone, which is a Townsend Labs L22. Pretty decent condenser microphone, but in this case we made the song, she took it home, wrote the vocals at home and recorded it there on a Rode NT2A. Slightly different condenser, but very much a common entry-level microphone that really does the job. So in the case of this, that's what we'll be tweaking. So to start this off, got some Pro Q3, doing some very light EQing. I'm just rolling off the bottom end, pulling out a little bit of that body, and as well maybe some harsh top end, just to pull back on any harsh sibilants that are coming through. Let's just give that a listen.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
A little bit of lifting, just pulling out any unwanted low end and just clearing up a bit of that top end. Next we move on to the 1176. In this case I'm using the Blueface one because you get a bit more brightness out of it. I'm using a ratio of about 4:1 with quite a fast attack, not the fastest but almost there, and a bit of a mediumish release. This is giving the vocal just a bit more presence. It's putting it a bit more in front of the mix on top of everything. And it's also just getting the dynamics, reducing them a bit so that everything is a lot more steady and just in your face.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
You can hear it's adding quite a bit of volume, but otherwise it's making the vocal sound really in your face and in place and just really up there, you know. So next after that, I'm using a de-esser just to get rid of any harsh S's that come through. In this case, I'm using the FabFilter de-esser and I've got it set to split band. So what this means is anytime she's sibilant, when there's an S, it brings down just the high end as opposed to the overall volume of the vocal. If you had it on wideband, it would pull down the overall volume. In this case, I've got it set to split, which only brings down this bandwidth of frequency that I have set here. So let's hear what this sounds like.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
Very subtle, only doing a couple dBs of reduction, but just enough to help clean it up a bit. Next up, we're using Fresh Air. This is a free plugin from Slate Digital, but just a really good choice if you want to add some crispy top end to anything in your mix. In this case, I find it's really valuable on the vocals. We're using a bit of this mid air and this high air, and let's just hear what it's doing.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
Just really emphasizes that brightness, makes it really pleasing to listen to. And last but not least, I'm using the Waves L1 limiter just to really do some final compression on those dynamics and just really get that vocal to stand out on top of everything else. Not doing anything crazy here. I've got the auto release on, so I'm just setting the level to reduce between 3 and 6 dB in the loudest parts, and that's about it. So let's give it a listen and see what it sounds like.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
And There you go. So that's pretty much the chain. This does change from time to time and I might tweak it slightly, but those are usually the plugins I might use. Sometimes I feel if I want to get a bit more clarity and punchiness from the vocal, I might stick an LA2A after the 1176 just to really bring out the body of the vocal. In this case, I didn't feel it needed it, so we've left it out, but it's an option. So right now we're listening to the chorus vocal, but when it gets to the verse, things start to kind of quiet down a bit, become a lot more soft. Let's skip over to the verse and I'll show you the next step I tend to add when it comes to helping with the dynamics of a vocal. So this is where we're at so far.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all.
What I find really helps when I need to get the vocal to just stand out on top of everything is using some parallel compression. What this is, I'm basically sending the vocal to a separate track where I have a compressor doing a real lot of heavy compression, but I've just pulled the volume way down and I'm just bringing it in subtly just to give us a little taste of this really compressed vocal, and that's just gonna add a nice little bit of volume, but generally just some presence overall throughout the song. And so if I go into my tracks here, I've got this Vox Para, which is the parallel. I can turn it on and you can see we're using another 1176, this time the black one. I've got all the buttons pushed in and I've got the fastest release and attack times, but we're aiming between 3 and 7 dB of reduction.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now.
So you can see sometimes it goes over, it hits about 10, but more or less it's landing between 3 and 5. That's where I like it to live. And I have it set to about minus 28.5 dB. So if we listen to just the parallel and see how quiet it actually is in comparison.
You and me were so different.
It's very quiet. That's all it's adding. But then in combination with everything else, it's giving you a real nice bit of clarity. I'll turn it off and then we'll turn it on and see what it sounds like.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now. I think that's better for the both of us.
It just really brings out those little minor details on the voice really nicely and just gives you a bit more clarity, which I love. So the next step, effects. It's my favorite section. I love adding delays and reverbs, things to excite the vocal. To start us off, I'm mainly using Valhalla plugins because I think they just sound great. Let's start with the reverb. We've got this smooth plate, got it about 2.29 seconds. We're using the 1980s color, a little bit of filtering off the top end and some pre-delay. We've also got a little bit of modulation going on in there. So let's hear what we've got with that.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now. I think that's better for the both of us.
Just adding a lovely space for the vocal to sit in, not taking up too much real estate in the mix. You know, it's not too busy, just pushing that vocal slightly further back, which is quite nice, giving us a bit of depth. Okay, so the next effect is a quarter note delay. I'm going to skip over to the chorus because this is where I'm using it. I'm not doing too much. It's a quarter note. I've got a little bit of spread going on. It's filtered slightly. There's a little bit of wow and flutter modulation. And we're using this tape delay style overall on the effect. But let's give it a listen and see what it sounds like.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
So you can hear very nice, very subtle. I am actually sending a little bit of the delay back into the reverb just to really blend the two together and just make it sit in its own little universe. But there you go. We also have one more delay that's a longer delay. I've got it here. And this is more of an accent style effect. I've got it set basically on a bar length, so it's quite a long delay. We're using a ping pong this time, so it's bouncing from left to right. You can see we're still using the tape style delay, but this time we're using the duct tape, which basically pulls down the reverb every time the signal passes through it. In this case, every time the singer sings, delay is down, and when they stop singing, it comes up. We're doing quite a bit of filtering to this. We've got some pretty major filtering here, as well as some extra filtering on the end of the chain. You can see we're also doing some more side chaining to this effect, so when the singer is singing, there's basically no delay, and when they stop, it really comes up and shines. We're also doing quite some major compression to really have this delay be explosive and come out and really be audible. But then again, obviously we're filtering off that low and top end just to really make it an effect. As well, we are sending a lot more of this delay back into the reverb. So let's just hear what this is adding.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive. Meet me in the middle, but I've already gone cross the line. You and me were so different.
So you can hear when the verse comes in, that delay gets pulled way down, so it's not overlapping too much. And if I just had to solo the vocal without the quarter note delay, just so you can hear what's going on there.
Meet me in the middle, but I've already gone cross the line. You and me were so different.
You can hear there when that verse comes in, basically cuts out the effect. That's why we have that sidechain compression there, because the verse has no delay on it. So we're sidechaining that lead vocal, just even when there isn't delay passing through, we're making sure that's not getting too much in the way. And then last but not least, what I find is a very important factor in all of this is auto-tune. So in the chorus, we're using this tuning a lot heavier than in the verses. We're borderline T-Pain with a retune speed of 10. If I pushed it any further, would be pretty much there with the T-Pain sound. But in the verses, we pull it back to around 50 to give it a more natural vibe. But generally, the tuning is there, especially for this style of music, is quite appropriate to just keep everything sounding a lot more pleasant, a lot more with the style.
Meet me in the middle, but I've already gone cross the line. You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all.
There are a couple cheaper alternatives to just using the Antares auto-tune. For me, this is my preference. I like to use this. I know people that use the Waves one. I know that Slate also have one that's pretty decent. So whatever floats your boat, they all do the same thing. Just figure out which one's best for you. If I was working on a mixed, I'd probably go in and melodyne it and even be a bit more specific with it. But for the case of just putting the song together, I tend to just stick with auto-tune because it's a smoother process anyway. But that's my process on how I would go, making a demo vocal sounding a lot more polished, a lot more radio ready. Now let's dive into how I would do this if I was just using stock plugins for all you guys out there that don't have access to all the other plugins. If I turn off this main chain and we go into our stock chain, you can see this is what we're doing. It's all the same stuff, just using the Ableton plugins. If I solo the lead vocal and bounce between the two, you'll hear they're basically the same.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now. I think that's better for the both of us.
If we dive into the chain, you can see here we're basically mirroring the same thing. We've got our low cut, pulling out all that unnecessary low end, and our little low shelf, doing some minor reduction there. And then we're pulling out a bit of top end just to help reduce any harshness. Now for the compressor settings, again, basically mirroring the same thing, got a ratio of 4:1. I mirrored more or less the attack and release time. I know that an 1176 release goes to about 50 milliseconds and the attack is quite quick. So I can more or less mirror where we're landing. So I've put the release to about 92, the attack to about 0.88, and again doing a similar amount of reduction. Ableton doesn't have a de-esser, but does have a multi-band compressor, which is basically the same thing. In this case, they do actually have a split band de-esser preset, which I've modified slightly. Normally it will be like this, using the center band, this mid band, but I've turned it off. I'm using the high band and I've pulled the frequency down to about 5K. So if I just solo that, I'm going to turn off the effects as well. We can hear that we're basically just attenuating this frequency. In this case, it sounds quite rubbish for whatever reason, but it's basically just pulling out all of that brightness.
You're scared you might get lost in the middle of some deeper thoughts.
Very subtle compression, about 2.3 to 1 ratio, and then otherwise boosting what's reduced back in the output here. And then moving on, we've got that same Fresh Air plugin. I've literally just copied it across, so that's all the same. And then the limiter doing a very similar thing, hitting anywhere between -3 and -6 dB in those loud sections. And I've got the release on auto, just to really mirror what we've got in the other chain. Looking at our effects, you can see here I've done a similar thing. I can turn off our reverb. I'm going to use the hybrid reverb because they have quite a nice collection of plates we can use. In this sense, it's a mix between a convolution and an algorithmic reverb, which I'm only using the convolution of these plates. Mirrored the pre-delay, pulled the size up to really match the length of what we're dealing with, and we have something like this.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all.
I had to do a little bit of sculpting with the EQ to really get it to match, but otherwise we're basically in the same world. I've done the same with the delays. I've got this delay here. I'm just using the echo. That's my go-to stock delay if I'm using the Ableton one. And you can see here we've got some quarter notes, adding a little bit of width over here. I've pressed D here because that you can actually add a bit of drive. So to kind of emulate that tape sound, I'm boosting it about 14 dBs on the input. You need to have that drive selected to really hear that sound. And then I'm pulling it back down on the output here to keep it the same. I'm also adding some wobble in the character here just to give us a little bit of more of that tape effect and having a bit of modulation going on in the sound there. But otherwise, this is what we're left with.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
Again, this required a bit more drastic EQing because the Valhalla tape sound has a sound of its own. So just to match that, I'm pulling the low pass down to about 3.96K and I'm high passing it at about 349 Hertz. This gate is only there really for the Valhalla delay because sometimes it tends to have a bit of noise, so I just have that there as a safety. For the case of this echo, you probably won't need it. You can do a similar effect for what I did on the longer delay. You just put another echo there on 1 bar length. And for the compression, I would just use a regular Ableton compressor, have the ratio to infinite, and then a fast attack and release, and you'll get a very similar effect. But in this case, you just stick the normal Ableton EQ after it to give you that filtering sound. And then lastly, for the parallel, again, similar thing. I would just have this compressor. I've got it set to infinite, fast attack, fast release. And that's about it. It's giving us our very compressed vocal sound.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all.
And there you have it. Let's just do a little A-B comparison between the third-party vocal mix and the stock plugin vocal mix.
You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now. I think that's better for the both of us. You and me were so different. I dive into my feelings and you just run from it all. You and me were so distant now. I think that's better for the both of us.
There you have it, pretty much 1 for 1. The reverb in the stock one does happen to be a little bit louder, but that's just a volume thing. Otherwise, they're pretty much a match. One thing I should mention, this whole time, obviously, we've been listening to just the lead vocal on its own. This song does have harmonies, and I feel harmonies do really bring a level of quality to a song. They're all being processed in the way I've explained, except in this case, I'm just doing tuning on the individuals, and then I'm processing the whole group. But you can see here, very similar, just doing a bit of cutting on the EQ. Similar compression, I just have a slower release going on. This is just going to push the harmonies slightly behind the lead vocal. I'm also using RVox just to add a little bit more group compression together. And then this final EQ is, I guess, there if I choose to sculpt it any further. So if I just blast that chorus with the harmonies, you can really hear the full power of this.
That's just how it goes. I do everything in overdrive.
Yeah, so there you have it. That's how I would go from mixing your demo vocals to sounding a bit more professional. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comment section below. If you have any techniques you'd like to add, please just let us know. I'd love to see what you guys had in mind, or if you enjoyed it and got something out of this in general. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. The support really helps, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Once again, I've been Chris Vella, and I'll see you on the next one.